longer a weakness. They feel better about it because they feel confident enough on something they need to know.
Oh, let's go. Party time.
It's a whole continuum, and every single preference is on that continuum.
Adjust their chin angle down so they can perceive the ball up a little bit more.
All right, so welcome back. Another podcast here. It's our second episode. Pretty exciting. So we'll get right into it. I think there's no need to fiddle around. So I think one big thing that's happened since we've been together last was we had the All-Star break. So we had a couple guys be able to reset themselves. So I just want to talk a little bit about what that process looks like when you have a short amount of time to work with guys or players. What does that focus become, and how do you identify what you want to focus on? And then what does that look like in terms of, really trying to tackle whatever the maybe issue or trying to clean up something?
Yeah, I mean, mostly it's just player feedback, right? Because you're not with them every day. So, there's a lot of stimulus, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of failure, there's a lot of those things going on, and sometimes you can just get in bad habits. So, it just starts with coming in and just listening. What's the player feedback, and then what you're trying to do in a short amount of time, whether it's a day, sometimes we have with these guys like Ben Cowles, just one day flying in, you're just trying to understand what their real versus feel is. Like, what are you saying? Okay, when you've been struggling, what are the adjustments that you're making? And I'm telling you, the majority of the time is they're trying to do the right things with the adjustments, but with the fear and what they're actually doing within the physical adjustment is actually compounding the problem. So just that player feedback and then kind of just listening to what those adjustments are, and then you're just going to work, right? It's sometimes you're trying to say the same thing in two to three different ways, and it can click within 15 minutes, or maybe it takes an hour or two. But with Ben, it was pretty fortunate that literally within like 30 minutes, we found a few things that he could, really understand. And then obviously in the second half, he started off really well, and it's something that, he got a little bit of boost of a confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one thing too. You know, when you talk about people being in profile, it's ever changing, right? It's not just you're in profile in this moment, so you're going to be in profile for the entire year. So anyone really, David can answer this. Talk to what leads to people to be more out of profile.
Um, I will say most part of the time it's expectation. So they're putting pressure on themselves, trying to reach goals. But there are actually a kind of a tendency for people to um, merge or to misunderstood the difference between the principle of the game and what they can handle actually. So in baseball, yes, you want to hit but that's a part of the game. So you cannot control the result. You can only control what you do. And most part of the time, it's really coming from here. So they're placing their head, their focus too much on what they want to achieve in terms like, let's say, I want to hit a home run. But actually, the home run can only happen if they move well. So, and this is the only thing they can control. So instead of putting the intention in, I want to hit the home run, let's put the intention on, okay, let's feel my sensation, let's feel my body move, do my swing with a very big intensity, then observe the result. And that's why sometimes I mean, not sometimes, I'm often reading that baseball is a game of failure. So part of it is true, but actually, I prefer to think that it's a game of learn. You're learning every single at bat. You're learning every single throw. You're learning because when you know your profile, actually, you can really tell yourself after the action, okay, what were my sensations? What was different from the previous one? And now you know actually what to work on. So most part of the time, there's a misalignment between the resource of the player, his intention, and the action. That's where people start to struggle. So this is like very the most important thing, I think, for me, and not only for me, but with all the guys working as MPs and Volo Dalan, is you really need to perform, you really need to align your resources. So your energy level, what your body can achieve with your intention and actually with the action. That's where you get the best results.
Yeah, something that always stuck with me for, was like, hey, the goal is not to hit, and like you can reach first base without swinging the bat, and that just brings you back to like as a coach is like process, 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 right? Like what can you control is like, no, go in there, let's be balanced, let's be free and let's react to getting a good pitch and focus on that process. And it's boring, right? From Tom Brady down on, you just hear about the process, 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 but does that give you the most mental freedom? I think we can all agree it probably does, right? And we're getting away from like this is the basic nuance of that process day to day to create this mental freedom instead of, the stress and the stimulus where our environments, even in college now in pro baseball, is like you got to get hits, you got to get hits. So, you got to perform or you're going to get released or you're only playing versus righties or you're only playing versus lefties. And it becomes this whirlwind of what we're doing to ourselves. And that's where the game of failure comes in, right? Not only from a statistical standpoint, but the external stimulus that we're consistently putting on ourselves. So that's why you need coaches, right? It's not just MP, it's not just all these other things that we do or with tools to coach, right? A lot of it's the mental part because, guys just get off course with that. And that's what you see a lot of time over the break. And he's right. A lot of it's just based off, expectations and intention and all these things. And we need to do the best we can to manage all those things.
I think one thing that I can take from my own career and then some of the hitters that, I've been working with as of late, when they feel that, effortless feeling of everything, moving how it should and how they prefer to move, it becomes effortless and feels easy, but then they try to get more. And I tried to do that as well in my career, like, oh, this is really easy, feeling like I conquered this, and then you try to get more and it actually does worse for you than does better. So having these athletes understand it, also the coaches understand, like, you're going to be a little bit faster. Like when you start to move, how your body prefers, you might pull off the ball a couple times right when you start to feel it because you're actually quicker and you can start your move a little bit later. But once you get in that groove, you don't have to try to get more. I think that's the biggest thing that I always try to do in my career. And back to what you said, Swoper, was just put so much external pressure on yourself to produce that when you're having an easy move, you try to get more to produce more. So bringing people back to, their mental state of, listen, like just control the controllables, working on being on time, swinging at the right pitches, and then, just making sure your move is your own and moving on from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what I think about a lot, ends up being related to like the energy. So how does the energy, you have a ton of energy in the beginning of the season in spring training for somebody, and now it's the All-Star game and they're how many games into the season? They have another 60 or so games to play, at least on the minor league side. So how does the energy affect how someone is moving? And how is that impacting them throughout from the beginning of the season to the middle of the season to now, at the end of the season and then postseason for some?
Well, the issue is all any performance can happen just because you have the right amount of energy. Nobody can perform at his best if he's like tired, exhausted physically or mentally speaking. So when you start a season, you get a lot of probably motivation. You work hard, you rest, kind of rest because of the off season for those that are not playing too much. But you're ready to play. So actually, because you are inside like your full per se level of energy, you're gonna be able to perform or adapt pretty easily. So if let's say a coach give you constraints because even if it doesn't fit how you want to move, you will be able to deal with it a little bit because you're full of energy. Now, what's going to happen when this energy is gone? Well, we have what I call actually acceptance tank capacity. And actually, when this energy is too low, your body will not tolerate anymore to move too much away from the profile. And now you're going to start to struggle because through the season, you get more and more tired. So by being into your profile, we are saving energy and we are more focusing, let's say, to move naturally or in profile 90% of the time. But by doing that, we're saving enough energy to play away from the profile 10% of the time. When actually, when you do the reverse, like it's becoming hard for you to play because you're wasting a lot of energy to compensate to move that your body doesn't want to do. And the first message you're going to have is you're going to have stiffness or pain. And as soon as those two information are showing up, it just means that you're running outside of energy and you're doing something that doesn't work for you. That's simple as this. So that's why actually we train our athletes. It's to be able to be more resistant. That's why we train. But actually, no matter what, between the beginning of the season and the end of the season, you get older, so you get more, you're going to be tired day after day, maybe even if you rest a lot. But those are high-level athletes or professional athletes. They can deal with that. They have the physiology to deal with that. They have the discipline to deal with that. But yes, so just to make it short, per se, a lack of energy will always make people more terrestrial than themselves. So the most terrestrial shape of the body is a fetal position. So it's full inflection. So when you have less and less energy, actually you're gonna lower slightly more your center of gravity and shift on your balance on another place under your feet because actually you cannot be on your number one, your best position anymore. But again, we can teach that to players. And I think this is probably the hardest part in the US is to build awareness for players about their sensation and how they feel. Because there's like I mean they're living in a competitive world and I get that, but actually again you cannot compete if you don't understand yourself. Or I
Yeah.
mean I'm kind of okay, so there's nuances into that, but so just go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you're tired, I mean, you can go 4 for 5, right? I mean, you can still have good games. We're not saying that just like when you have low energy, you can't perform. Obviously, we know that's the case. I think the key part of that is like, hey, if you're 60 games in, one, learning how to be a pro, right? We talk a lot about nutrition and sleep and all those other things because they're a priority in the United States as far as that goes. But we don't talk a lot about, hey, are they trying to adapt the same way they are in game 90 that they were game one? There's no way they have the same level. So I think that's really the key there is like, of course, like the younger you are, the more adaptable. I mean, we see that with shoes and what, younger athletes don't even really notice the shoes, but you get to be in your 40s like me. And if I wear the wrong pair of shoes, I can't get out of bed the next day. So, there's things that just understanding that, yes, you can do this. And there's not a lot of narratives to prove that. But with a 43% UCL rate and all the injuries that currently are happening, like, we got to pay attention a little bit more to like, hey, yes, we're malleable, we're adaptable, all these different things, the brain is the plasticity, like all these different things. But hey, man, like we got to understand the demands and the adapt isn't going to be there at game 90 and 140 than it is game one, So I thought that was a really good point about, the level of what you're trying to actually manage within a season.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of brings me to the next point or question that I have. And we've been talking about, or maybe people have heard about motor preferences. If you were to explain to someone that doesn't know what motor preferences are, in a couple sentences, um, Maddie, why don't you do this? Go ahead and explain, what motor preferences are, and for the novice out there.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to explain it is it's your body's individual roadmap. When you look at a road, like there are many roads that veer off that main road. And with motor preferences, you're kind of finding which turns are a little bit easier for you and which turns are a little bit harder for you to do. So, it's not the be all end all. I think it's just a really good tool to understand, how your body operates, what drills or cues might be a little bit more preferred to you and to be able to experiment within that profile and find what works for you from a given season. I think it always comes back to, like David said, the body, you're an older a week from now. Like every day that goes by, you're a little bit older, your body changes a little bit, and over time, cues that worked at the beginning of the season don't work at the end of the season. And that's just because the body's constantly evolving. So when you understand your foundation, how you prefer to balance, how you prefer to coordinate your move, you can get through those up and downs of the season, with the information you have. If you don't have information, you don't know. And that's where the tech comes into play. That's where understanding your body comes into play, and it's all within context. I think the biggest thing that we talk about is understanding the context. If a player comes up to us and say they have hamstring soreness, well, what type of athlete are you? What muscle chain, is more of a dominant muscle chain? And we can make basically decisions and, educated reasonings behind what we're saying to help the athlete. So just, a little less trial and error, a little bit more understanding of your body, and, being in control of your career in that way.
I just
Yeah,
got to
one thing
add
that
in there, it always comes back to time, limiting the trial and error. I mean, I always ask like whether you agree with motor preferences or you don't, I'm fine with whatever opinion is well, how are you coaching then? How are you assessing? How are you coaching? How are you observing? Why are you saying what you're saying? The answer is always why. Why are you saying it and how much time do you have? And those are two things that every coach can relate to. Time, why, and how you're doing it. So it's whether you believe in it or not. Like, why are you right or left-handed? Like, the person's right-handed, so you have to coach them right-handed. Whether you want to believe in it or not, it's still always, it comes down to the trials and tribulations from the time and why you're doing it.
Yeah, one thing that I like that you said was experiment within, your kind of like preferred range. I think that's something that I am a big like I like to talk about because I think of all of MP as ranges of motion that we're just trying to figure out that we work in. So we're narrowing the range of motion that someone prefers, and inside that we can have so many different options. So I think of it easily like slot. So if someone's vertical, this slot might be within here. That's a lot of range for them to work in from 3/4 all the way over the top from slot. So I think that's something that maybe gets, misconstrued at times, but it's ranges we're trying to set people up in. And I think as coaches, all we're trying to do is put the athlete in a position to have success. That's all we're trying to do, right? And it's preparation and it's all that good stuff, but that's essentially what we're trying to do is when we're positioning players, let's just put them in a position that they're going to be able to have the most amount of success in, rather than trying to, not that people try to lock them up, but I just think that the ability to understand the range is huge.
I
So
agree I agree with you there. Like I wanted to piggyback on that. Like I think the most important thing or one of the important things you said was for them to find success. Like this tool is there to help the athlete, have take less time to find their optimal setup, to find their optimal way of movement, to find some cues, a little less time to find that cue that works for them, to ultimately give them time to work on the things that will make them produce in game. Because if anything that we do, we're not here to be good in the cage. We're not good to be here in a bullpen. Like we're good to be here to be successful and optimize ourselves in game. So by limiting the time of the trial and error, by understanding how your body moves, okay, now I'm a hitter. I always use that example because I lived it. Like as a hitter, like I had my 2, 3 cues that were working for me during that month. I had my drills that were making me balance so that I could have my adjustability in game when I got thrown a nasty curveball that I wasn't sitting on. But at the end of the day, it gave me time to work on what made me good in game, which is my timing and my pitch selection. I can work different shapes off the machine and how to find an answer for that. I can work on, two different machines set up at the same time and one hand's dropping a ball and the other hand's not and like work on what makes you good in the game. And I think I saw a huge difference in my performance coming back from winter break from at Maryland than I did in my previous years because I didn't have to spend as much time trying to find my A swing. I understood what that looked like, and now I had way more time to allocate to, what makes me ready to play day one to produce for the team. So I think that's one of the biggest parts of MP is it gives you more time to actually work on what makes you really good in the game, and that's what we're looking for the athletes.
Well, just one more thing on that. Just like the other thing too, he mentioned earlier, not in that answer, was the mental freedom. How many different coaches out there are on this call, even right now, that have told someone they were doing something wrong or inefficiently?
Yeah.
You know?
100%.
I mean, so it's like, hey, if you're doing that, what about the mental freedom from the athlete or the player to just like stop being told what you did was wrong when and for once an athlete here is like, no, that's okay. And just that mental aspect and freedom of being like, no, that's okay. Let's adapt to how you do it, right? As long as it's not, you're not hitting 100, right? It's like, hey, let's adapt that part. And all of a sudden you see, wow, you can see it on their face that like for 15 years from 3 or 4 different coaches, they've been told that's wrong or don't do it that way or, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden you're seeing that. So like just to piggyback off all that, like not only the time, I thought that was a good answer, but it's also the mental freedom.
No, the perfect example of that, I worked with a hitter this week, and in his whole career, he's been told you have to stay on the back leg.
Yeah.
Well, we find out his best balance point is actually more in his front leg. So having him start a little bit more 50-50 when coaches that he's worked with for his whole life has tried to put him further and further on that back leg, and all it does is make him crash more forward. So understanding how the body prefers to balance, we can actually understand why they're making some of these mistakes. Like it's not good to be crashing forward. We're not saying
Yeah.
that, but understanding that his best balance point is in his front leg. Let's get him into that front side a little bit earlier and have his weight distributed a little bit better. And now we can start to see some of the more consistent results that we're looking for.
Yeah, and then you got drills from there, you got kickbacks, you got all different types of things then you can employ, and use in those moments.
Yeah, that's a really good point there. Um, so we get all this information from Volodalen. They're kind of like our parent company. Um, Brought us the framework. David was trained there. So David, can you give us some insight into Volodalen? They moved or they're moving.
They moved actually to a new lab in Lausanne, Switzerland, hired a bunch of people. So there are, I think, around 20 now working at the lab. Um, they have 6 PhDs on site. They have physio. They have a strength and conditioning coach. They have a podiatrist. They have people that are what is psychologists working with people that have mental health challenges for athletes. So they have like a whole holistic approach now in Lausanne. So Volo Dalan has been created by Cyril Gendre, with my nice French accent. And Cyril has started to study movement early 90s, more in the tracking fields domain. He has like a lot of certification into that domain. Then after that, early 2000, start to see some different movement in his athletes and start to observe kind of a continuum between what you used to call the contractile in thigh, the contractile in foot, elastic in thigh, and elastic in foot, which are actually going to become terrestrial and aerial. So he made a website in early 2000 that reached 1,500 pages. They have like 200,000 visits per month. It was like crazy, like the reference in running at that time. Then start the scientific foundation between 2000 and 2010, when they start to really study. He's got his PhD in running physiology. He published book, ran camps. So he built everything from that. In early, no, mid, sorry about that. In 2010, actually, between 2010 and 2015, he has patented what we call the move dial, which is a diagram that we use actually to detail how the body and how the center of mass of the body actually moves in a 3D from the best coordination point to the worst one. He has been proved actually by scientific studies too. So that's a tool we use a lot with our athletes to explain to them whether they prefer to be in flexion and extension, whether they have a back or front leg extension. So those are this is a tool actually we're the only one to have in the world. So it's like very specific to Volodalen and motor preferences. Um, then later, after 2015, built the first lab in Switzerland, hired PhDs. There are now around 60 scientific publications and articles about MPs. The last one is actually in relation with Mayer and Briggs personality indicators, which is like pretty amazing because kind of associate the way we move and the way we think, which is something that we have always thought. So, but now we start to have some proof about it, which is crazy. And since 2025, Volo Dalan is just like going bigger, bigger, and bigger. They have a company called Pro Trainer, which is specified in strength and conditioning. They work with IMP, which is I would say the European leader into primitive reflex. And now they have us. So that's a little story short, a long story make short about Volo Dalan. All
Yeah.
information are on our website, so you can like really take a look at it if you want. They are still doing some studies right now. They have like I think it's 4 or 5 studies ongoing right now, which is pretty amazing. And they're working with Olympic athletes, worldwide champions. We estimate, and I think it's a very low estimation, that around 300,000 athletes are working with minor preference in the world. Just like did Volodalen actually train all the French tennis coaches through the federation. They did also the golf federation. So just those two federations, like it's probably like 2 or 3 million people. So all those athletes are linked to MPs, just like that. We are, I think we are something like 5,000 trained coach across the world now. So it's not like something, new or a theory or no, it's there. It's working. It's proven. It's
I got to piggyback off that because that was the first thing when when I found David and then did my research on Volodalen was like, I thought it was, I mean, under a rock, or I thought I was under a rock when when I came back and started asking people. And it's one of those things that to me as an American, to just summarize that, it's like, hey, you have over 30 scientific publications. You've been doing the research for 20 years. Most science is just disproven within a couple years. They've trained, specifically them over 25,000 athletes they've assessed, right? So not only the scientific publications, but the amount of athletes in-house they've assessed. And we're not just talking about baseball, right? We're talking about tennis, golf, soccer, running, bike fittings, podiatry, primitive reflexes, stuff that nobody's talking about, which is why when we get all this pushback, it's like, hey, it's so deep, it's so nuanced. There's so many different ways to do it. Sure, if you want to take this angle and just pick at this and go at it, okay. But it's a holistic approach to all these different things we're bringing, all these people we're bringing into the fold, and doing that in real time. That's the difficult part. So for me, that's what blew me away was just the diversity within how many different athletes they've trained and not necessarily sticking in one silo and how like diverse their portfolio is on working with all those people. And to be honest with you, we talked about in the first pod is like I was just consistently pushing and prodded David, like trying to poke holes, trying to poke holes. You're trying to poke holes with Volo Dalan and all these different things. And that's the cool part to see their evolution. But also really people just need to take the time to read the studies. I think if people just did the research instead of criticizing first or get trained in it and do the research, we would have more open discussion. But again, people want to be more right than they do want to be just open and have these discussions. So it's like read the scientific studies, do the research, do the training, and then let's have a conversation. I mean, I think that's what any coach has done where whether I did different companies or did their things or at level of education. I mean, it goes back all the way to the CSCS and NSCA 25 years ago. Like it never changes. I just think that we need to do a better job of trying to not be right and do the research and have open conversations about it.
Like some of the coolest stuff that I've started to learn, outside of understanding my motor preferences is the world of primitive reflexes. And that's, through motor preferences, like, we all the cues that we don't make up. We're reusing cues, we're reusing drills that has been around for so
Mhm.
long. But then when you get into the world of primitive reflexes and then also the podiatry of the flat feet and how that's impacting the compensations within the body, like David, can you for the people who don't know, can you touch upon like what primitive reflexes are and give people, maybe there is an athlete they're working with that is really, really good in practice, but when the lights are on, they have all the tools to succeed and they still can't and they don't understand why. This is like a huge like something I had never heard about in the industry, and I think other coaches would be interested to find out more about, primitive reflexes because I had never heard about it as a player.
Yeah, so primitive reflex are genetically encoded into everybody. So it's a kind of a code that the body uses to develop the motricity. So you're going to use your primitive reflex during pregnancy. Actually, they are developing into your body. On the first 3 months of pregnancy, the baby is working more in concentric and inflection. From month 3 to month 6, it's going to be more an extension, and the last 3 months, it's going to be a mix of both. But those movements are encoded, and actually, during the pregnancy, the baby brain is actually learning from the body and vice versa. So it's kind of building the communication immediately for the best of the rest of their life. And the primitive reflex normally should disappear most part of the time on the first 2 or 3 years of life. Um, for example, one of them is you don't teach a baby how to be breastfeeded. It's just happened. It just, it's natural movement. That's what it is. So there's about 70 of them now. We know them for a while. It's two of them most part of the time are, 99% of the time are used just after baby birth by doctors just to figure out if the neural system works well. So they're using the moral and the grasping. The moral one is when they are actually dropping slide gently. Okay, just don't drop on the floor. Just dropping the baby slightly, and the baby is gonna open and stay closed right after and become closed right after. Or the grasping one is just putting fingers into the end, and the baby stands up and start to walk, for example. Those are two reflexes that are used by doctors to figure out if the neuronal system is working well. But for an athlete, for any reason, actually, some of those reflexes may stay active after your first 2 years of life. And this is what's all the issues can come from sometimes, like as you mentioned, an athlete can perform very well at practice, well, just because it's a safe environment for him. He knows the place, what to discuss. There's like not much so much pressure on himself. Everything is fine. But now you're putting him on the field or in a high stress situation, and let's imagine he has a motor reflex. Well, the motor reflex, as it is a reflex, it just answers automatically. So it takes over your own intention or on your own focus. It just happens. You cannot control it. So it's going to make you more in extensions. And you see those hitters most of the time starting to swing and get in extension quickly during the swing, and they get a swing and miss. But it's outside of that control. There's nothing they can do until we integrate that motor reflex. So those primitive reflex, again, they're pretty well identified. I think actually the first identification is coming from US. I will have to dive a little slightly deeper into that, but it's very well known, and it can really bother a lot athletes. Volo Dalan has made a study actually with a training soccer center in, I think it was in France, and athletes were between 15 and 18 years old, and 90% of them had primitive reflex still activated.
Wow.
And actually, on those 90%, 10 of them were injured. So we can actually link injuries or bad performance to those primitive reflex, but it can be even worse. It can go down to mental health. But there's a lot of documentation and article about. I dive into that for my son, but
Let,
it's
let me
very
ask let me
important.
ask a question. How many times have you all seen someone in the cage take one swing and work really hard at something in the bullpen or in the cage or in practice, and in the game it looks completely different, can never figure it out? I mean, all of us, right? I mean, the other part, so that's number one is right. The bottom line is the primitive reflexes will take over motor control, the most important thing. Number two, they can be integrated. Not all of them, but some of them can be integrated. So when we're talking about education, right, and motor preferences, say you understand the profile, well, primitive reflexes can change the profile. right? How many times have we seen a Babinski reflex, which is something that puts you on the outside of your feet, or something like this that can actually affect the profile? So yeah, there's some pushback on, hey, well, this person assessed me and all that. Yeah, it's complex. If you don't understand primitive reflexes, right? And this is what's kind of cool. Every PT I meet or every coach, I just simply ask that. 98% of them have never even heard of it, right? So if we don't understand what the primitive reflexes are, which I think the other thing David said, if you guys missed it, is it can be enhanced or exacerbated once they're under stress, right? So the primitive reflexes being active under stimulus and stress is way worse, which is why sometimes that practice swing can look completely different in the game. You know what I mean? So this is like a baseline, right? Not just like a motor preferences assessment. If you don't understand what the primitive reflexes are, they take over motor control and you can't train a reflex. It's a reflex. So like we can talk about muscle fiber types and trying to hack that, which there's only a certain percentage, but primitive reflexes, like it's the baseline. So I'm glad you asked the question because it's something that nobody is talking about, even as a physio, right? Or even as a general practitioner doctor or an orthopedist, right? And I mean, we've seen amazing things, just from integrating them or having them understand it and go through that and to lower the energy level and the stress level.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, I think we talked about this maybe last year. I was watching like Aaron Rodgers when he was jogging out to the field, the first start with the Jets, and you can kind of see him on the outside of his feet, and he kind of has like instability in his run, and I'm like, what's going on? And then you think about, the type of shoes that he wears, and the shoes are softer, and if he's like a little bit more springy and then he's wearing softer shoes, what does that do to, tendons and muscles and so on? So it does that, lead to more stretching, or is it more stress? Does it make it tighter, in terms of the ligaments and the tendons? So I always think it's interesting when you can see real examples of things that are happening at the highest levels across not just baseball, but football and soccer and all these other sports. Basketball obviously is a big thing right now. A lot of Achilles are going out, and what's going on in terms of, how is that affecting them? Coincidence possibly, but most of the time I don't know if it is. So,
Well,
and then on the
that's the
other
thing
side of
is,
it,
yeah, that's the
sorry,
thing
go
is
ahead.
there, we train in adaptability. No, more instant. We do the adaptability part until we can't anymore. So that's a good point about, yeah, we're adaptable, but that's a key point of what you just said is like we just keep pushing and pushing and until that adaptability tank is empty and then something's happening instead of understanding these little nuances of things that could give you a heads up on maybe how to train or practice.
Yeah, and then to add to the complexity of things with when it comes to primitive reflexes, it's not all bad. There's reflexes that could help you and is benefiting you, and there's plenty of people that have them and they're very successful in terms of their production and their output. So that's the complexity of it. You can take that small section and somebody can hear that and say, well, baseball's been around for so long, and now you're telling me about primitive reflexes. People have been successful. Absolutely. Like, people have been successful prior to motor preferences. It's just allowing you to get to the answers faster, like we keep saying. So, um,
Well,
there's go
I
ahead.
think that people before were more successful, but they were less coached based on biomechanics models. They were more natural. So, I mean, maybe some of them have primitive reflex and perform well, but nobody told them, oh no, don't do that. Put your elbow here or do this. They were like more free to move the way they want to move. And I think at that time, not saying that our biomechanics are bad, but the global models are bad. Like making one thing, one model, valid for everybody, that doesn't exist. And that's where we actually struggle the most, is trying to explain to people that when you take a look at the Randy Johnson, when you take a look at Nolan Ryan, don't tell me they move the same way. That doesn't exist. And that's the issue we have now, is like, just because just a basics observation, like nobody has the same morphology. So how can people move the same way, knowing that each segments have a different length, knowing that each people have different muscle fibers? different way to balance themselves. It doesn't make sense. So I think that baseball is here for, yeah, I agree with you. Very old sport, very, conservative sport per se. But maybe before 2000, I guess, maybe 90s, people were free to move.
Well, I mean, I think too, like in the youth, like I played football, basketball, baseball, and hockey growing up, right? Exposing yourself to figure it out on all these different sports. And I had similar tendencies with the way I wanted to move within those sports, but more celebrated to play that than I sound like an old fart kind of saying that. I know I'm gonna get criticized for that, but it was true. Like you were outside playing, you were figuring it out. You were playing different sports where, I mean, I'm gonna say 9 out of 10 the baseball players that I recruit now only do baseball all year round with the same facility, with the same training regimen, whatever. And like, yeah, there's I'm not saying you can't be really good doing that. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying is that maybe the play level for children and then like the level of exposure through all these different things allowed me to like being a basketball player at DeMatha or sitting the bench even made me a better baseball player. Like, it just did, and there was ways you figured out in that sport how it translated into there. So I think that's just something as a society to take note on. That's kind of like currently the trend. And I don't know if that's a good thing is all I'm saying.
My mind goes to what Nick said, where, people, could potentially say, well, baseball's been around for so many years. We didn't know about primitive reflexes. We can still be successful. My brain goes to how about all the kids that we're not talking about talent here. Just if you understand primitive reflexes, it doesn't mean you can, impose that on someone and then become a major leaguer. But the
Hmm.
guys with the talent, big league talent, with the tools that get drafted in the top 5 rounds out of high school and then they don't pan out. Like how many of those kids could have turned out well worth their pick just by understanding, how their body operates. Do they have a primitive reflex? We can see this kid hit a 500-foot home run in BP, but in the game, it looks like he's never held a bat. Like, could that be a primitive reflex? It might not. Like, the kid might not have the mental capacity to perform in a game, but it could also be a primitive reflexes. So when we start to understand the whole picture of the athlete, how their personalities influencing their movement. Are their feet, are they compensating for their feet having non-genetical flat feet? Like just getting all this information and understanding the context of within each athlete is like going through can only help them. So that's where my mind goes is yes, it's people are going to succeed regardless of biomechanics or the information that is out there. That's going to happen. But how many could have succeeded more if they had the information? That's where my mind goes.
And you
That's what
have
I
to
think about for myself.
yeah, you have to add on the top of that the cognitive bias from the scouts and the organization. You may be the top athletes. If you don't fit the model that the organization or the scouts want, so there's so many different variables that people don't consider. Just put everything into context, and the only thing that matters is actually your own body because that's the only thing you can control.
Yeah, you talked about across the board. Swoper was like, you tried as a kid, you played all these different sports, right? And we talk a lot about finding the system that works for you or finding what works for you in general, right? Like whether that's a sport you play, whether that's a position that you end up playing over the time and you know, you start at one position, then it's like, or you start to develop and you're getting bigger. So maybe you get a little slower or whatever happens, and you start to figure out where you're going to be successful at. So, um, you talk about like when you're going through all these different training programs and these different drill sets and all these things over the years of development. Like we said, baseball's been around. How important is it to be able to say, "Oh, these are the answers for those people for this athlete"?
Yeah, I mean it's super important. I mean the individuality and trying to find that. This is why you need coaches. Again, I go back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast. You have to understand their experiences, what they've been through, how they've been coached, the real versus their feel. Like, do they have any idea of why they're good or what they're doing? Like all these things you have to take into account and should be part of the process as a coach. Like otherwise, why are you coaching, right? If you're just going in there to say, hey, we're going to do all the same drills for these 15 or 20 people, yes, you will always get a percentage that will do well, and then you'll have, the other half not do well. That's what we do, right? And um, you know, that's why the other point with this is like motor preferences, again, I said this in the first podcast, don't make you more talented, right? So you're going to have this cognitive bias from success based off small percentage of players. And that's always what we get into the nuance when we're talking as well. It's like, okay, it's like, so yeah, it's super important to understand the history, the player feedback again, and understanding all that, because how can you start to develop this individual program or relationship with someone to develop them to get better if you don't know these things, right? So it's extremely critical in what should be any coach's process or protocol and how they're going to coach a player.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. What else? You guys got anything else? Any final thoughts?
I think it always boils down to like we touched out a bunch today in the podcast, and it may seem overwhelming. It may seem like, oh, well, not only do I have to understand motor preferences, I have to understand how to implement them. I have to understand primitive reflexes. I have to understand the feet. Yeah, we just wanted to touch on how in depth we can really go, because from a social media standpoint, and what we put out to try to inform the community, we try to keep it very basic level, but in all reality, it gets much, much more nuanced. And it does take some time to learn and understand and get a grasp. And, speaking for myself, like I lived it as a player, and for the last 2 years, like every day I talk about it with Swope and David and Nick, and I learn something new daily. And I have to understand that I'm never going to know everything. Like there are plenty of things that I need to learn more, but also knowing that people move individually, I also know that people learn differently. There's more things for me to learn outside of motor preferences that can make me a better coach. So just understanding that, yes, we can get really in depth. There's a lot of layers to it, but at the end of the day, it's all for the athletes. How maybe it's one athlete that we can impact and help and have them enjoy their career a little bit better because they get that mental freedom to do what their body prefers. So I know that was a lot of information we threw at you today, but just touching on how in depth we can go, and looking forward to keeping expanding the education that we put out there for everybody.
We're treading water right now. Like, wait till we start to get into the deep end of the pool or, into the ocean for that. It's a journey. And like, if you're listening to the podcast, then you probably have a growth mindset and consistently want to get better and learn. And I think any person that's seen successful people or, they read every day or they do these things, they're always seeking to get more knowledge and to improve themselves and whatever. And that's the premise of why I was blessed to meet David and why we started this company, was to just continue to build and grow off of that. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of things to look forward to as we go in the podcast.
Absolutely. Help as many people as we possibly can and have fun doing it. All right. Well, until next time.